and welcome to Miniature Addiction Club. My name's Lou, and today I'm going to be making 3 different houseplants for my bohemian style room box, because no room is complete without an indoor plant. To start with, I'll be making this snake plant, which is the easiest plant to make. This is a beginner-friendly miniature, and it is super easy to make. For the pot, I'm using a metal thimble that I had laying around. I sanded the bottom with a nail file to make it sit flat before painting it with some acrylic paint. I'm using some bronze-coloured paint to go with the other elements in my room. To make the leaves of the plant, I stuck some wide general-purpose masking tape to my work surface with the sticky side up, folding over the 2 ends to keep it in place. Then I cut some thin wire into short lengths. I didn't measure these, but you'll want them to be around 5 centimeters. Next, I placed the wires onto the sticky side of the masking tape, leaving 1.5 centimeters between each one. I left some of the wire exposed at the bottom to help with painting and to secure them into place later on. I made each of the leaves a different length to add more realism. Then I sandwiched the wire with another layer of masking tape. Using the rounded end of a paintbrush, I pressed the masking tape along the length of wire to make sure it was smoothed down and adhered properly. I did this on both the front and the back. Then I went ahead and cut each of the leaves out with a craft knife. I tapered each one, making the tips pointy and widening out the leaf towards the bottom. After cutting out each of the leaves, I used a toothpick to run some wood glue over all of the cut edges. This helps to seal the masking tape together and create some added detail on the leaves. Then I left the glue to dry overnight. The next day, I went in with some light green acrylic paint as my base layer, and I painted both sides of each of the leaves. Then, using some dark green, I loosely painted some stripes on the leaves to give them a variegated look. I also painted the edge of the leaves to match and sealed them with a gloss varnish. Once the leaves were dry, I took some air-dry clay and pushed it into the bottom of the thimble. I filled it with clay until it was just below the surface. To make the dirt, I mixed some matte Mod Podge, PVA glue, brown acrylic paint, and some ballast. I mixed it thoroughly with a palette knife and filled up the rest of the thimble, wiping away the excess. I like to slightly overfill it when I do this, as the clay and dirt layer will shrink slightly as it dries. Then I trimmed any excess wire off of the leaves and gave them a slight twist to add a bit more shape. Then I poked them into the thimble while the clay and dirt mixture was still wet. And there we have our first super easy houseplant. To make the next one, I took this cap from a can of deodorant and sanded the bottom flat. I also sanded the sides to prepare the surface for painting. I did a base layer of burnt sienna acrylic and let it dry. For the second coat, I added some baking soda to the paint to give it some texture. This makes the pot look less like plastic and more like terracotta. Once that had dried, I went in with some watered down green acrylic paint and a little matte Mod Podge to make it look like moss was growing on the surface. I brushed it on and dabbed off the excess with my finger. To give the pot a rustic, aged look, I also added a wash of white acrylic using the same technique. To make the leaves, I rolled out a thin sheet of air-dry clay. Then I cut out a loose heart shape with a rounded bottom and removed 3 small sections from either side of the leaf. I used my silicone sculpting tool and my finger to smooth down the edges before adding some veins to the leaf. Then, using a flat blade, I sliced the clay off of the tile and placed the leaf over some scrunched up tinfoil to dry. I repeated this process to make a bunch of leaves in various sizes. I cut some lengths of floristry wire that's wrapped in paper and glued one length to each of the leaves with tacky glue. Once the glue had dried, I painted them using acrylic paint, building up the layers. I also bent some wire to make some little roots and painted these a pale green colour. Painting wire that's already wrapped in paper is so much easier than painting regular wire, as the paint sticks to the paper and you don't have to worry about it chipping off. I checked to see if I needed to trim any of the wires before adding them to the pot. This time I added some PVA glue to the bottom of my pot before adding the air dry clay and my dirt mixture to ensure it stays put. If you want a great life hack, try pouring your PVA glue into a pump dispenser. Then I added my DIY dirt mixture on top of the clay. While the clay is still wet, I went ahead and poked the stems into the pot. And don't forget to add the roots. For the next plant, I wanted to make a hanging plant to put on my miniature bookshelf. I painted some paper and played around with some paper punches. In the end, I didn't like how either of the leaves looked, so I ended up cutting them out by hand. I cut some small rectangles out of my pre-painted paper and then folded them in half lengthways. Then I cut out each leaf and refolded them, bending the tips a little to give them a slight curl. I glued each leaf onto the painted wire stem with tacky glue. For the plant pot, I painted this metal valve cap and added the same clay and dirt mix as the other two plants. I added the wire stems and let it dry. And here's how they look in my room box. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment below. If you managed to make it all the way to the end, let me know in the comments below how many houseplants you have. I think I have 13. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.